So hi everyone, I'm Shabana Ahmed. I'm a UX lead and user researcher from Berkshire. So just a tiny little bit about me is I love to be on my bike. So I figured out last year that the best way to see your hometown or kind of surrounding areas is to be on your bike. It's really fun and you get to see so much more. Recently, well, not so recently, I wrote an illustration, a children's book called Onion Buddy, which is this one here. And I think secretly that's the job I've wanted my whole life, so I would love to do another one if it's ever possible. Currently I work at Human, and Human is a digital transformation business. So we specifically work with bio, life science and pharmaceutical companies. Previous roles, previous lives, I've worked in the mobile industry, telecommunications, finance, e-commerce and a little bit of fashion as well. I've also got experience of working with pretty large product teams or smaller and tight-knit teams as well. And I love both, so I really enjoy a bit of agency mix and client side as well as a designer. So in my day job, so I'm designing experiences for pharmaceutical and healthcare clients. Most of my clients are in the pharma top 10, and that's they bring their own challenges because of, I suppose, the size and the gravitas. And some of them are smaller companies as well. And what I'd love to talk about today and give some insight into as an experienced designer is to talk about, for me, the biggest challenge is actually within user research. So hence my topic's called Meet the Users You Can't Meet. So in a normal project delivery, I might be working on websites and apps, e-details, portals. And what I've learned is typically my end users primarily consist of healthcare professionals, so we call them HCPs. So a good question is, what are HCPs and what do they look like? So they are actually the healthcare workforce as we know it. Physicians, we commonly call them doctors or GPs, nurses, surgeons, dentists, therapists, key opinion leaders, and as you can see, I mean, the list goes on. It's a pretty large and really varied workforce. So for today's talk, I put together a proto-persona so we can get to know a type of user participant that generally I'm designing for. So this is Carl. So Carl is an oncologist. He's almost 50 years old. He works for a very busy London-based hospital. Somebody like Carl is really hands-on, so he also runs an educational program at work to onboard new members and maybe newer staff to get them really up and running into the best working practices and make sure that knowledge is always at a really high level of quality. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the kind of thing that will always matter to Carl is making a huge difference in his patients' lives in any capacity. I'll just bring on some pain points. So typically with all HCPs, they're always time poor. Someone like Carl is under a 360 degrees type of pressure as well. Making decisions for him is like a huge thing. He's always thinking about consequences. So everything's time-based. So whatever he commits to outside of his day job, it has to be a very good decision. Motivations and goals include, again, making a difference in the lives of his patients, finding information that's really accessible and really high quality or really credible, networking, and of course, seamless experiences. So the big question, why am I actually not meeting my users? So the first one, and hopefully you can see that from the proto-persona, is that it's a really super specific demographic and a good thing to compare it to. So in a previous role, I was UX at giffgaff, and sometimes in terms of validating our work and finding out user feedback, the entry level would be something like, do you own a smart device? Are you a customer of a UK network? You might become more finite and say things like, are you a millennial, so age brackets? You know, what are your social media habits or shopping habits? But again, that population is pretty much, it's Britain. It's a really easy user group to target and focus. Another one is that HCPs are typically not on user research platforms. Now, it doesn't mean that they're definitely not. It's just generally, you won't find them on user research platforms. And another one here that it's probably the most important is it's about the pharma companies, excuse me, themselves. So pharma companies cannot be seen to incentivize HCPs in any way, shape or form. You can never lead with a bias or any type of direction. And it's something, the industry is super heavily regulated. They've got kind of a code of conduct on authorities and guidelines on what you can and can't do. So if you ever try to lead in this manner, A, it's really naughty, and B, you could get into loads of trouble, so nobody wants to take that risk. This diagram, I think maybe everyone in the room has seen before. Maybe you're working to this kind of delivery, or you're aware of these type of principles. And what I've done here, so I've just highlighted in the areas in green where probably as a designer in a stage of delivery, whatever process you're at, you probably want to validate your work with users. So gather intel, find out what the users actually think about your product, and learn about what's working well as opposed to what's not working so great. So this is something that I've happily used in previous jobs, and to be honest, all of my products as an experienced designer. It's something that really makes sense to me and makes sense to when you're working in wider product teams, which is great. So in thinking about this type of working methodology and the fact that HCPs as a user participant base are really, really, really difficult to reach, that's kind of how I feel about work. So user research is something that kind of keeps me awake at night, and it's something that I think about a lot. It's something that I am always trying to find ways of how can I improve this, how can I find better ways to reach HCPs, and how can I make sure that I'm not omitting proper user research from our projects. So currently, what have I been doing, and what can I do to solve this? So the first thing is continue to create user tests. So always act in the vein of you're creating products or digital services with the view of, therefore, human beings. So not to pick up bad habits and stop creating user tests. It's to carry on, absolutely. Another one is gather input and feedback amongst general population. So whether it's internally, clients and stakeholders, or indeed the wider populace. Sometimes I'll be in projects where it's not about, for example, I don't need somebody who's very scientific or has a medical background. I'm just testing accessibility, or I'm testing a new idea for a type of feature. So absolutely, you can still test that with people, which is important. Another idea I like to do is getting to know the clients and having better relationships with them is to ask them to send out my test to maybe their own seed list or their own participant group. So I'll admit this is really unlikely and rarely happens, but it's worth it, and it opens up a wider conversation about user research, which is good. And the other thing that you can absolutely do is to buy existing research. So there is a paper out there called Physicians' Needs and Multi-Channel and Tech Behavior. It's quite a specific study written by a leading market research organization, and they specialize in healthcare. So does this help me to release better products? Am I learning about my users and how they're using my products? Not really. But does it help me to think about the mindset of HCPs and learn more about the kind of creatures that they are? Yeah, little bits in here. It's always useful. So here's a question. Is that ever going to be enough? Generally, no. So you can do as much as you can, but of course, you always have to go back to the user and to understand what's a failure and what's a success. So that gets me thinking about what else can you do. So going back to user research platforms, so some of the bigger ones, when you talk to them, they can indeed supply those niche demographics, such as nurses. I would say nurses first, and then they'll say we can get some physicians on board. But this is really, really expensive, and that in itself is it's a barrier, it's a blocker, because talking about experience design, user research, just generally digital products and services in the pharma or the healthcare industry, it needs a lot of education. So digital in itself, I would say, is behind the curve in pharma. So then to have conversations where the client has to invest, or you want to talk about budget beyond delivering UX, sometimes they're difficult conversations. Another is specialist recruitment agencies. So there are agencies that I've spoken to and found, and there are some based in Brighton and some in London, and they're great, and they might work with clients such as the NHS, and they can supply you those niche participants. This is great, but again, it comes down to costs. It can get very, very expensive, and that might not be something that your clients immediately say, yes, add it to the scope, and it's something that we're interested in. So my advice is to leave the building, go out and learn as much as you can. So what I've been doing over time, and I'm working in pharma for about a year and 2 months now, is to go to conferences, events and meetups. Increasingly, I'm seeing design talks where they're specifically talking about designing for healthcare, which is really super valuable and really good to attend if you can. So what I've learned is that other designers are probably facing the same challenges as you. And it's great to hear about their case studies and their problems. How do they solve problems? And what are their learnings and outcomes? This screen grab is from, I went to an event at London EdExcel last year, and the NHS were presenting this. So their digital team, and I think it was their digital lead, came to do the talk, and she spoke about their 5-year forward product roadmap. I was just amazed that they even have a product roadmap. I don't know why I thought that, but I was really pleased. And one of the things that I found interesting is the NHS in Britain, they're talking about how to utilise progressive technology or how to widen up design thinking around end-to-end experiences for patients and improving the services within the NHS. So really, really fascinating and really useful to learn about their roadmap. The other thing I do often, so talk to other people who understand HCPs. And I'm really lucky because I work with people who come from medical backgrounds or specifically scientific research, or perhaps they've got X amount of years within the pharmaceutical industry, so they're really sound for knowledge. So I'll use them when I'm crafting problem statements, or sometimes, and what I'm increasingly finding is user stories. They have to have really specific rationale, otherwise it may fall flat quite quickly, and clients want to see specifically how your stories and then flows and wireframes may even lead to realistic problems that need to be broken down. So it's great to talk to people at work that understand the kind of terminology and how HCPs talk to better craft those. And this book here, so this is a real book. It's called The Textbook of Pain. And the first time I saw this at work, it's hilarious because it's genuinely massive. It's such a big book. I thought the title was brilliant. It kind of looks like a prop that you'd see in a WCW match because it's so big. It just made me laugh. But yeah, I'm lucky because I work with people that understand the content within this. It's also good to talk and go through literature like this because this is the everyday type of thing that HCPs are looking at in terms of content. So it helps you to understand volume, tone of voice, language, and the types of content that they're really happy to go through and receive. Beyond that, so obviously user research within the pharmaceutical industry, it's not as easy as working in other industries, for example, telecommunications or perhaps fashion. So it forces me to think a little bit differently about things. Recently, I took my mum to an appointment at her local hospital. And so from when I drove in, I said to myself, you're going to be super open to receive any kind of information. Be really receptive to things and try and pick up on anything and everything if possible. So it's things like, from when we checked in, how many people were in the waiting room, how much time she got to spend with her HCP, how much time she had to wait before she could even meet her HCP. I took a walk around the different areas and I tried to make sense of why they've split up the therapy areas the way that they have. So to me, it's a physical taxonomy or a navigation. So trying to pick things apart to think, well, why does this make sense to patients, to doctors? Is there anything around this that I can learn about in terms of distraction and noise? So it's great to be in their environment. I didn't have any opportunity to test things with them, but it's brilliant to kind of be where they are. The other thing I did was I had an appointment with my own doctor, and she's an amazing doctor. So at the end of this, I thought I will be absolutely nuts if I don't at least ask her a question, because she's exactly the type of human being that I'm constantly trying to reach so I can design better products and deliver digital services. So I asked her a question and she gave me an answer. And honestly, I'm so happy that I did. I really, no regrets. I can't tell you the question and answer, but I'm really, really glad that I got to ask her. So thinking about how all these things have helped sort of UX efforts in pharma, some really high level things, understanding about what HCPs like and dislike. So we spoke about the kind of content that they're open to receiving. I know for a fact that high value information, it doesn't matter how well it's written, it has to cut through the mustard and be really high value, otherwise they'll switch off. Peer credibility is something that surprised me. So HCPs are happy and they're interested to see what other HCPs in their sort of arena or within leadership, what they're talking about and what they're not endorsing, but what they are sort of backing or interested in, that holds really good rank to them. Being sold to in any form, especially from pharmaceutical companies, which are my clients, is massively, they tune out so quickly. And part of that is to think about if the content is produced, written, organized in a particular way where they feel like it may come across as a little bit sort of marketing-esque or a bit sort of brand-like, that, immediately they'll stop trusting that provider or that experience and they'll switch off really, really quickly. Another example, so it's understanding the need to balance heuristics such as familiar language versus scientific language in online tools. So in a client project, I designed a type of, it was a search tool. So I designed a cloud tool where there are symptoms and it was very high level and it was to aid conversations between HCPs and their patients. So I started off with scientific terminology because that's what made sense at the start. And then going through various iterations, having more conversations with the clients and doing ongoing research as much as I can in any kind of way, shape or form, I made a switch to replacing that language with familiar language. So this is the language of the patient. So when they're talking about their symptoms and how they're feeling, what's working for them, what's not working for them, those were the cues that's going to help the HCP identify faster the type of dosing or prescribing that would be relevant and applicable for that patient. Another one is I'm conscious of making space for a changing demographic. So thinking about maybe less than 10 years, millennial HCPs will be the dominant demographic within the HCP as an industry. So thinking about expected ways of better or improved experiences. So voice search it's not new, and I think industries are taking real advantage of this, but increasingly HCPs will be using their phones or they will expect their devices to perform all kinds of search functions for them. Anything that takes them away from tedious admin, which is everywhere within medical practice, it's such a big problem and an interesting problem to solve. So anything that takes them away from that layer of admin and gives them and rescues time for them, it's going to be massively welcome. Cloud-based solutions, thinking about content that's aggregated in a source in a place and it's pushed out across everything and anywhere will not just be useful, it'll be massively expected. And the last thing, so it's really helped me to understand that we're not just making products because it's my job or that's the brief or that's what we've been asked to deliver. In small ways, we're helping HCPs become more efficient and knowledgeable and prepared in treating some of the biggest diseases, or sometimes it may just be to make a small difference to a human being. So, and that in its own way is definitely rewarding. It feels like there's a lot of responsibility. At times it feels scary. At other times you feel like you're behind the curve digitally even, and what can you do to address that balance and make it better? But it's definitely rewarding. So I've got a question. If there's anyone in the room tonight that can help me talk to a HCP and do some testing with, I'd love to connect with you. Give me a shout. Thank you.